this week's Technique Tuesday video, I'll demonstrate the outline stitch bind off, also known as the casting on cast off. This bind off is a match to the smooth side of the long tail cast on. As always, if you'd like to jump right to a specific point in the video, there are direct links down in the description. So here is a little swatch done in stockinette. The bottom edge was cast on using the long tail cast on, and the top edge was bound off using the outline stitch bind off. And what you'll see is that at the bottom edge I have a twisted loop, these twisted loops, and each loop is surrounding the legs of the stitch above it. So this twisted loop is surrounding the V's of this column of stitches. If we look at the top edge, let's turn it around. If we look at it from this orientation, again, we've got these twisted loops and they're surrounding the V's of the stitch that are above it from this orientation. But what we can see if we follow this twisted loop and the V's of the stitch all the way up to the very top, then what we can see is that the twisted loop at the top of the swatch is surrounding these two loops, and this twisted loop is surrounding these two legs. So you have that half stitch offset that you always get when you're knitting in the opposite direction with a set of live loops. The outline stitch bind off is a type of sewn bind off. It's not the sewn bind off. That bind off is slightly different. Both the sewn bind off and the outline stitch bind off were created by Elizabeth Zimmerman and described in her book, The Opinionated Knitter. They're on the same page. But this one is the version that creates the smooth edge of the long tail cast on at the bind off edge, whereas the sewn bind off creates a bumpy edge. So I've just tied a piece of contrast yarn to the white yarn just so you can see what's going on. So what we are going to be doing is we are going to be turning this tail into an edge of twisted loops that connect these live stitches together along the edge. And so in order to do that, because of this orientation, we want to keep our working yarn above the needle. It's going to fall below the needle many times, but you want to remember that you want the yarn above the working needle as you are working this bind off. So for each bind off, you are going to go down through the center of the second stitch on the needle. So you're going to go down through the center like this, and then you're going to come up through the center of the first stitch on the needle. So again, you want to make sure that this yarn is above the working needle while you do this, and you notice that the loop is behind my yarn needle. So I'm going to pull this through, and I'm going to let that first stitch come off the needle. And then I'm going to tighten it up. You can leave this pretty loose while you're working and then tighten it up later. It's a little easier to tighten up than it is to loosen later. So now, again, the yarn's got to be up here. Now what you want to do is go down through the second stitch. So I'm going down through the center. You see how my yarn needle is to the left of the strand that's on the needle, the leg that's on the needle, so that when I come up from behind to go through the center of the first stitch on the needle, you can see that I have that back leg, the leg that's hanging over the back of the needle. I've captured that. I want to make sure it's clear that you're not going through the two stitches like this. You need to go down through the center of the stitch on the needle and then up through the stitch that's first on the needle. And once again, make sure that your yarn is above. You can let this stitch off the needle right now if you want, and then pull it through. Just come around the back side of that stitch one more time and pull out the needle. So you can see you'll have all these kind of loops like this. You can pull them up toward the edge, but then you can also adjust the tension on these loops, either just by pulling on them with your fingers and going stitch by stitch along the edge, or you can use your yarn needle and adjust the tension there. Before I cast on for a project, I think about what I want my bind off edge to look like. For a project knit in one piece where both edges will be exposed, I might want those edges to look the same. Likewise, for a project knit in multiple pieces with the cast on edges of some pieces exposed and the bind off edges of others exposed, I might want to use a cast on and bind off that match in order to create an overall sense of continuity. That continuity isn't required and may not even be desirable in some cases. It really depends on the specific project and what you as the knitter want for your finished project. While the outline stitch bind off is a perfect match to the long tail cast on, it can't be just ripped out if you make a mistake or decide you want to do something different for your bind off. Just as the yarn tail is pulled through each stitch as the edge is created, it has to be taken out in the same way. You will most likely find it very helpful to practice on a swatch before using it to finish your project. I'd like to thank all my supporters who have bought me a coffee on Ko-fi in the past few weeks. I really appreciate it. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.